Welcome, everybody. This is Power Podcasters. I'm Scott Paton, the Dean of Blogonomics and Podology. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. And I hope you enjoy the next half an hour or so, as I've got a very, very important guest. He's the co-founder of Your Marketing University. It's a website devoted to giving small businesses the tools they need to market their businesses online and offline, and without fortune, which is always a good thing. And his passion is helping small businesses learn to market their businesses in an ever-changing world and marketplace without having to spend big bucks on a large marketing agency. I just said that, sorry. And he's a bit of a marketing geek. He's a speaker. He's a trainer. He's one of the top Udemy instructors and a wonderful guy. He loves dogs, so how can you go wrong? And I don't want to say he was a rock star. I think he still is a rock star. So a big welcome to Eli Delaney. Hey, Eli, how you doing?
I'm doing awesome, Scott. Thanks for inviting me so much. I have a pleasure doing this, and I have fun with this kind of stuff. So let's have some fun.
Awesome. All right. So you're a power podcaster. You've had a podcast for about 3 years, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Tell me one of the reasons why you started it, because I think most people think of it in terms of fame and fortune, and it obviously can go that way for sure, but that's not the only, and they think that by just being the celebrity or being the star of the show, that's going to bring them the fame and fortune. But that's not really the only way, and in fact, it's not the way I use it, and it's certainly not the way that you use it either.
Now, definitely. Now, my podcast is called Driving Your Marketing, and if anybody wants to check it out, it's at drivingyourmarketing.com. We have a link for iTunes and all that kind of fun stuff. But the biggest thing, what I do is I interview experts in the marketing arena, whether that be somebody who's a specialist in becoming a #1 bestseller on Amazon, or just getting your book done, by the way, podcasters like yourself, somebody who's an expert in putting together podcasts, or somebody who's an expert in LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it is. And I bring in all these experts from all over the world, different specialists, I should say. And the biggest thing that I do with that is not just to interview people and gain the popularity and get a lot of viewers, but to connect with these people. That's my #1 reason for doing it. Like my course on Udemy, what we talked about was, it's a networking course. It's on how to network more effectively, and so I actually use my podcast as a networking tool. What the great thing about it is, what ends up happening is I meet people that I would never have gotten a one-on-one conversation with otherwise, but I reach out to them and say, hey, you know what, I read your book, this thing is so awesome, would you be interested in being a guest on my show? I have this podcast, this is what I talk about, and I think my audience would love you. And yes, 9 times out of 10 they say, of course. I've got Larry Winget, he's a 6 times New York Times bestselling author, has been on my show. Bob Berg wrote The Go-Giver. Andrea Waltz wrote Go for No. All these different people that I've had as guests on my show, I probably never would have actually gotten a chance to get to know them as well if it wasn't for opening the door by just having the podcast.
Right. That's one of the reasons why I got into podcasting too, was the fact that would you be a guest blogger, write a guest post on my blog, or no, I'm not going to do that. Can I use one of your art? Could you write an article for my article? No, I'm not going to do that. Can I talk to you for 10 minutes, record it, and send it out to potentially hundreds of millions of people? Oh, okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and
a lot of people just like to talk, right?
Yeah, especially like these guys that are authors and speakers and things like that. That's what we do. I'm also an author and speaker, so me getting in front of a group of people is I have fun with that. That's how you and I met, was doing a Udemy hangout, and now we're doing this, and I'm sure we're going to be doing other stuff. Now you and I are friends. We've got things that we can collaborate in all kinds of different areas. But if it hadn't been for that to begin with, it never would have even happened. And that's why I love this stuff so much. It amazes me how many people, I've gotten clients out of it. I've gotten some of these guys have turned around and promoted some of my products and my programs before, just because of that. And then on top of it, it's like, that is my main purpose. For me, I look at it exactly the opposite. The icing on the cake for me is the point of, now I've interviewed Larry Winget, so I get an extra 200 or 300 viewers to my website within the first hour of it showing up. You know,
Yeah.
to me, that's like the icing on the cake. That's not the primary piece.
Right. Yeah. And that's really important. Is it all kind of comes together. And the other thing I was thinking was too is it's not about, like, I'm sure you didn't call them up and say, I want you to be on my podcast, and then as you know, and then the next sentence wasn't, I'd really like you to promote my new product.
Oh, absolutely not. I don't ask for that. You know, if it comes up in situation sometimes, but it's only if it comes up in the right situation. And most of the time, it's what I'll do. And I actually have a very specific format that I use in my show. At the very end, I always say, you know, if there's anything that I can do to help you out, reach out and let me know. And I say that to every one of my guests. And if I don't, it's purely because I just forgot for some reason. And I
Right.
truly mean that. And when I get off the live call, when we stop the recording, I tell them, you know, by the way, this was awesome stuff. I really appreciate your time. And by the way, what I said at the end about if there's anything I can do to help you out, let me know. I was totally 100% serious. And usually it's kind of funny because they'll stop and they go, oh, well, okay. I don't really know what there is right now, but let me think about it. So what can I help you with? And so it kind of adds the reciprocity right there. And I know, you know, I'm not doing it with that purpose of, well, if I say this, then they're going to want to help me out. I do it with the point of wanting to help them out genuinely. But it
Yes.
ends up becoming the side effect of the whole process.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that's kind of surprising for people that are just starting out on podcasting, because they don't think that there's anybody wants to be their guest. That's my experience when I've been talking to my clients. Like, who's going to come on?
Right.
Anybody you want is going to come on. All you have to do is ask. And the main reason is most people are starving for someone to listen to them.
Yeah.
You know, particularly the speakers and the authors who have this message that's just burning inside them and they want to get it out. And you come up and you say, well, because they hire people to actually phone, right, radio stations, TV stations, newspapers, and everything else to try to get them out there. And then you call them up and say, oh, I got this show. I got, 10,000 people maybe listening to me, whatever it is, 5,000. I'm just starting out. Doesn't really matter. It's a show. And can I have 20 minutes of your time to talk to you about your book, your message, whatever it is, and get it out to my tribe, my community, my audience. And they always go like, well, yeah, sure, like, when are you available? And that's when you realize they've got lots of time, right? We think they're really busy, but no, they got lots of time.
Yeah, and it's really funny because people tend to think that somebody who's in that celebrity status is really hard to get a hold of. And honestly, they're not as hard to get a hold of as you would think, and they're a lot easier to actually talk to than you would think. You know, people that I've had on my show, some of these guys are like, even 3 years ago when I started this, I was terrified by the concept of even just reaching out to them to say, hey, would you be interested? Like, oh, well, I just have this small podcast. I don't have hardly any listeners. I got like 10 listeners at the time, And it amazes me how people are so easy to pay attention. I mean, and the way I always look at it is, number one is if they're genuine, they want to be able to do it. They want to help because they got two things. Number one is that they want to help you. That's just the nature. The most successful people in the world actually are more willing to help you than you would expect, because the fact that most people think that when you're that successful you don't have time for the peons of the world, as some people tend to think about it, and that's not how they think. They actually think exactly the opposite. They think, hey, how can we help more people with this entire process? And so what ends up happening is that those are the people that are actually pretty easy, and then you're going to have some that they're just busy, and if the worst case scenario, they say no, like, hey, I'm really sorry, I just don't have time to do it, and you just move on to somebody else.
Yeah. Or you say, hey, I'll touch base with you in 6 months and see how things are then.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll have to get on a schedule that's 6 months down the road. I've had some people where I've literally booked them 8 months down the road for the show because the fact that they are that busy, but they still want to help, they just can't today.
Right.
Well, I'm okay with that.
And, you hit on a really important concept, I think, Eli, in terms of fear, because we have the fear of speaking,
Mm-hmm.
We have the fear of kind of getting out there. I mean, there's a lot of fear. There's the fear of technology, like, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to push the button? I mean, the worst thing in the world is having a really tremendous interview and like you just knocked it out of the park and your guest knocked it out of the park, and then you realize you didn't record it.
Mm-hmm.
So
I had that happen.
me too. It happens to everybody, right? And so we have, the fear of technology, the fear of speaking, the fear of this, the fear of that, the fear of getting out of your comfort zone to ask somebody. And I think once we recognize that that's part of the process, you have to exercise that anti-fear muscle so that you can do it. And as you were talking, you reminded me of some fear that I'm actually going through right now, because one of the things that I do with podcasting is I help nonprofits and NGOs get their message out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've worked with a number of nonprofits, one in Canada called QSO in particular, who send 250 volunteers overseas every year. And I call it micro podcasting, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because we think of, okay, I'm going to have a show and I want 1 million listeners, okay?
Right.
But what if you had 250 people going overseas to Madagascar and Kenya and Chile and Dominican Republic and India and Burma, all these, Iraq, whatever, to do really important work on the ground.
Right.
And you taught them how to podcast, and let's assume that they were antisocial and they only had 200 friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
All those 200 friends and family would probably love to hear every week 20 or 30 minutes of the volunteer saying, this is what I did. I did this and this and this and everything else. And as a result of that, 200 people times 250, that's 50,000 people that would hear about your nonprofit or your NGO that would never have heard about it before, plus they're hearing about it almost on a weekly basis. And from there, those people could become new volunteers, they could become local volunteers, they could be sponsors, they could be donors, there's all sorts of things that could happen because of that. They could connect you with other people that are, and so it goes, right?
Mm-hmm. That is a brilliant idea. I love it, and it goes along with everything that I totally stand for. Is the whole collaboration concept of how can we work together to build a bigger tribe. Just as an example is what we're doing right now. I have a course on Udemy. I have several other courses that I do. You have your course on Udemy. You bring me on board to help share some of my insights related to podcasting because I do have that podcast. That's going to help your audience, and that helps me get in front of more people at the same time. And then vice versa, I turn around and I posted in my class today, this before we started this, saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to be sharing some really cool stuff on Scott's podcast. You don't even have to join the course yet just to watch this show, this particular one, but you can watch us live in 20 minutes. Here's the link.
Right.
And so I want to get more people exposed to you and what you're doing, and hopefully they're on this call and they're going, oh, you know what? That's a really good idea. I can use a podcast as a way to network. And so now they're looking at your stuff as well because of that concept, that idea. And so what you've just done there is you've taken it on the nonprofit standpoint of just saying, okay, I'm a person and I got 200 friends between my friends and my family and my social media people that I can do this little show, a little basic show, but I'm actually part of almost not really a show, but a network. So I have a show, and Bob has a show, and June has a show, and we all play on the same network per se, but somebody listens, my dad listens to what I'm doing, and he goes, okay, that's kind of cool stuff. What's June doing over here? And listens to that and gets really excited about it too. And then it just keeps expanding and spreading.
Yes, that's the whole idea.
Yeah, I love it. It's brilliant.
So I've been looking for ways to find someone who's an influencer, so that I don't have to go and talk to knock on doors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to be an old-time comic book fan. I used to read DC comics, Superman, Batman, like crazy. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm in my glory right now because there's a TV show called Arrow, which I just love.
It's an awesome show. I love it.
Yeah. So I just went the other day on his Stephen Amell, I think is his name, and when I always thought it was Arnell, and then I realized it's not an R-N, it's an M. so that's totally screwed me up. But
Okay.
he had this post about how he wanted to help people, and so he was going to do something for different charities, and he had already done something for this charity and something from that charity. In other words, the perfect person for me to talk to about micro podcasting.
Awesome.
And I just like closed the window. I read everything, closed the window, and started shaking, right? So we all go through it. And, you know, my next step is, and I thought exactly what you were saying was, well, he's too big, he won't listen to me and everything. And there he is saying, you know, tell me about something you think I should support.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's the cool thing about it. And great thing is that, you know, and this comes back to like a sales mentality, is so many people have a hard time in the sales process of selling anything. You're selling the idea to somebody else. Your kids are selling you on the fact that they want an extra cookie. Your dog will sell you on the fact to get up and go throw the ball for them. It's all, we all live in sales no matter what it is. So we got to shift away from that mindset of it being scary and think about the fact that, you know, in a situation like this, if you reach out to him and let's say he says no. Worst case scenario.
I talk to the Flash.
You talk to him. Yeah, it's like, okay, that's the worst case scenario.
Arrow said no, I'll talk to the Flash.
Exactly. But, you know, worst case scenario, he says no. Well, guess what? If you do nothing, it's an automatic no. So you're no worse off by just saying, hey, would you be interested? And keep in mind, everybody's busy. Everybody has their own agendas. That's okay. So he may say no. If he says no, then that's fine. You know what? That's okay. Move on. Again, just like you said, you're going to go talk to the Flash. He's the next one in line, you know? Right. It happens. And so when you think about that, if you can get over that fear, and it is a hard fear. I mean, I still fight that on a regular basis. But I have found that I would say 95% of the time, when I've actually reached out to somebody in that situation, the ones that I've had the biggest fear about, the ones that I expected to not respond, were the first ones to respond. And they would say, I would love to. How can I help? Yeah.
And it's exactly like you said, like the people that you think aren't going to be open to your ideas are usually the ones that are the most open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Really cool. So what are the other things that you've found when you've started podcasting that you were maybe a little surprised about?
I think the biggest one that I was surprised with was that a lot of times you'll find that your guests aren't as prepared as you think they might be. So, and the funny thing about it is that this even comes from the people that you would expect to be more prepared. If you're just starting out, don't worry about them being perfect. Remember, it's just a show, okay?
Yeah.
For me, one of the things that I always keep in mind, and when I talk to my guests, I always tell them before we start, I'm like, just think of this. I mean, I want you to you know, you sent me your information, so I have some basics, but remember, this is a conversation. Keep it as a conversation. We're just chatting. We're having a good time. Have fun. That's the most important thing. Number one, have fun, and number two, teach them something. Give them something they can walk away with. And for me, that's really important because we're talking about marketing. So that really is the key to the whole thing. But I always push the concept of have fun first. And if you have a guest that isn't as prepared as you think they should be, wing it. Because guess what? Your guests will never know.
No, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I've only had...
Listeners don't know.
I had one time I did have a guest who sent me a list of questions, and they were so scripted that when I asked a question out of order, it totally threw them off. And I did have some editing I had to do to kind of fix that. It happens. One way that I would suggest is if you have questions, you know, I know some people say their format is, here's the questions I will ask you on my show. And that obviously would help alleviate some of those kind of things. But always just keep in mind, if you're doing a podcast and you're pre-recording it, it can be edited. You know, don't worry about it being perfect. The most important thing is to show energy, give value. Don't expect it to be perfect. If you expect it to be perfect, you're never going to go live because it never will be.
Right. So I have a question about editing.
Yes.
How much editing now do you normally, would you say on average, last 6 or 7 months? Because you've been doing it for 3 years. So how much editing now do you think ends up happening.
As little as possible.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm the
Seriously.
same way. Like, I chop off the beginning because I always have a pause
Hmm.
before I
Yeah.
start, and I chop off the end because I always have a pause before I stop.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, of course, it's been 10 years of doing this, I can't remember the last time where, oh man, like we just screwed up so badly, I've got a whole chunk that I have to take out. However, what I always tell my guests is, if you make a mistake, be quiet,
Mm-hmm.
because that will show me on the waveform a nice flat
Yeah.
line, and then I know, and then we'll talk about it, whatever, like, so that you're back on track, and then we'll be quiet again, and then you'll start to go over, and or I'll ask the question over or something like that. So what happens is I know right away, chop here, chop there, and then get out. But it's
Mm-hmm.
been very, very rare, and I think that's one thing that kind of scares people too when they're just getting into podcasting. They think, oh man, like I got to learn like GarageBand or Audacity or some audio editing, Adobe Audition,
Mm-hmm.
and like I can't even send email, right? So, so the
I
good news is after
Yeah.
a while you don't do it.
Right. Um, Always remember your first few shows are going to sound awful because they're your first few shows. It takes
Yes.
practice, you know. But when it comes to editing, don't worry about cutting all the ums and ahs and stuff like that. Is my number one bad word. If I were to actually go to a Toastmasters and actually speak in front of them, they'd be smacking me across the head. It's a word that I've never been able to break myself of. It happens. But I do
Yes.
the best I can. I'm aware of it, and being that I am aware of it, I do a lot less than I used to when I started. But when I do my editing, I do some simple things. I cut out noise. So I use Audacity is what I use for my own editing. So I have blank space at the beginning, so I can actually use a noise sample, cut that out. I will boost the bass a little bit because it makes it sound a little bit smoother, and then one
Never
little
thought of that one.
yeah, especially for guys, it actually helps. It does actually help for women as well. But if you boost the bass a little bit, it actually makes a difference. And then here's the number one secret that makes a difference is, I don't know if you've noticed, but I do tend to talk kind of fast sometimes. I
Hmm.
do that on purpose because if you talk faster, it adds more energy to the show. I will, on top of my speed, I will actually, using Audacity in the filters, there's a increased tempo. And you can actually,
Oh,
I will increase the tempo by 5%. The thing with that is that it increases the speed, so it basically takes the same show and shortens the length, so it speeds everything up without making you sound like a chipmunk.
perfect.
Yeah, and so it adds a little bit more energy to it. You'll notice that as you're seeing me, I'm moving my hands and all this kind of stuff. I do this when I'm not on video as well because I want that interaction. I want that energy. I'm also standing up. I don't sit down when I do this stuff. And so all these pieces add more energy. If you want a successful show, show energy more than
Yes.
anything else because that's what people want. The same show I was telling you about, that the guy, when I asked him questions out of order, it messed him up. He was one of the most boring interviews I ever did. I almost dropped it. But it was still fairly new in my career of doing this, and I was like, okay, I need to put it up there anyway. Plus, I knew him personally, and I really didn't want him to be irritated with me for not doing his show. But I learned a lot of lessons that day. And that's with anything, not just podcasting, but anything you do. You are not going to be great when you start. You're going to probably be pretty bad when you start. It happens. But
Yes.
the more you do it, you practice, you get better, you get more comfortable. I mean, I talked about Larry Wingett. Now, I've known Larry for years. But I knew him originally because I bought a copy of his book at Barnes and Noble. I happened to see the book. It was called Shut Up, Stop Whining, and Get a Life. I see the title, and I'm like, ooh, that sounds like a good book. I pick it up. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to like this. I bought the book, loved it, and I actually was a follower of his stuff. I was reading his books and watching his videos and all that kind of fun stuff. And then over time, I ended up getting to know him. But when I did my interview with him, I get done with it, and he goes, man, you are one of the best interviewers I've ever had. I was like, really? He's like, yeah. Now, he had just before the show recording that I did with him, had got off the phone with Fox News.
Wow.
He had just done a Fox News show, and then he comes on my show and turns around and is talking about how great of a host I am. And I was like, that is so cool. That made me feel so awesome.
Hmm.
But the whole point was because I had practiced all these years, and you just get better over time. I mean, that's really what it is. If he had done my show when I first started, he probably would have said, "Yeah, buddy, you got some work to do." Yeah.
And that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're getting kind of towards the end of this particular conversation, Eli. I hope to have many more with you in the future. But before we go, tell us a little bit about your Udemy course, How to Become a Networking Rock Star to Grow Your Business.
Okay. Yeah, the whole course is right now it's about 4 hours, a little over 4 hours worth of content. And the whole point behind it is I use networking to grow all of my businesses. My first business, when I first started, I was working out of my dining room building websites. I was a web designer with a desk in his dining room. We basically ate dinner on the couch because we had no place for it. And what I did was I joined a chamber of commerce as my very first way to get the word out there. And I fell in love with networking, with meeting people, and that's how I grew my business. I actually paid for my chamber membership in the first month, tripled my business in 6 months, and had tripled it even further by the end of the first year, to where by the time I actually stopped that business, I had opened up an office, had 5 employees, and was closing 3 to 5 contracts a week, and my sole marketing was networking. It was meeting people. And so that's what I do. I have so much fun with it, and you can do it. It's very inexpensive. You can get started literally today. Basically, you can find an event to go to tomorrow, and it's a really cool thing once you understand how to do it properly. And the hardest thing is a lot of people don't. They come in with the idea of come buy my stuff, and that's not how to do it. And so that's the whole point of the course. The course teaches you how to become a networking rock star and meet people from, whether it be locally for your local business, or if you're doing, online marketing, you still go to conferences and seminars. That's where some of the best stuff is done. I've done some amazing deals at the bar at 3 o'clock in the morning. And
That's right.
I don't really drink. I mean, that's just meeting people, just hanging out with them. And so that's the whole point behind the course.
Awesome. Well, Eli, thank you very much for being on here with me. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. And I think you're a rock star, so I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate it.
And thanks for joining us, everybody. This has been Power Podcasters, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.